Well, hey there, I'm Emma from mmmEnglish. So, I've been talking about modal verbs over the last few weeks, about all of their different uses. Now, don't worry if you missed out on them, the links are right here. But one way to make sure that you don't miss out on any of my weekly English lessons here is to subscribe. Subscribe by clicking the red button down there. You'll get a message telling you as soon as there's a new lesson here on the mmmEnglish channel. So you can keep studying with me and keep up to date with all of the new lessons. Okay, so we've been talking about modal verbs a lot, and in this lesson, I want to focus on the way that they sound when they're spoken. So this is a pronunciation lesson. That means you have to be ready to join in. Say the words out loud with me. You must do this. Well, you must do it if you want to improve your pronunciation, and I'm pretty sure that you do. Let's get our modal verbs up on screen. We've got could, should, would, may, might, can, will, must, and shall. For the record, I hardly ever use shall. And amongst all of my native English-speaking friends and family, I hardly ever hear it. It's quite formal and perhaps even a little old-fashioned now. It's the kind of thing that I would hear my English grandma say, but not my friends. So I'm actually just going to remove it from this lesson. I'm going to get in trouble for that. But I want to focus this pronunciation lesson on contractions, and shall is very rarely contracted anyway. And one final disclaimer, you are practicing with me and my Australian accent here, which is a reasonably standard one, but there are differences between native English-speaking accents. Okay, enough of that. Let's just get started with these words. Could, should, and would. Now, the first thing that you need to pay attention to here is that the L in all of these three words is silent. Don't try and pronounce that L. It's actually easier than you think. Would is pronounced just like would. And could and should are also the same. Could, should, would. So let's look at all of the possible contractions for these modals. Now, we learnt in earlier lessons that any of these modal verbs can be used to talk about the past simply by adding have, followed by the past participle verb. So in spoken English, have is often contracted or shortened. Could have is often said could've, could've. So the have is shortened to just of. Now, if you're listening to native English speakers, you might not even hear that v sound. Could have can also sound like coulda, coulda. You could have brought the dog. You coulda. You could have brought the dog. And the contracted pronunciation of have is the same for all of the modal verbs. Should have becomes should have. Should have, or shoulda. We should have left earlier. We should have left earlier. Would have becomes would have, would have, or woulda. My dad would have known what to do. My dad would have known what to do. Might and have become might have, or mighta. She might have taken the keys. She might have taken the keys. May and have, may have, or even maya if you're listening to a native speaker. I may have lost his address. I may have lost his address. Must and have becomes must have, must have, or muster. We must have left our tickets in the car. We must have left our tickets in the car. Remember, it's okay to use these contractions in informal writing. But in formal writing, exams, reports, and letters use the full word have. And if you're ever unsure, just write have. It's not too formal. Okay, so when we use these modal verbs in a negative sentence, not is often contracted to the modal verb. They're pushed together. That's what a contraction is. So could and not is contracted and it sounds like couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't. So the not sounds like "nt" at the end of the modal verb. Okay, let's go through this in a little bit more detail. We've got could, "nt", couldn't, couldn't. I couldn't believe it. It was such a surprise. I couldn't believe it. Shouldn't, shouldn't, shouldn't. Shouldn't we wait for Sam? Shouldn't we wait? Wouldn't, wouldn't, wouldn't. They wouldn't ask you for money unless they really needed it. They wouldn't ask you. Mightn't, mightn't, or mightn't, depending on the accent. You mightn't believe me, but I'm telling the truth. You mightn't believe me. Mustn't, mustn't, mustn't. Notice that the middle T is not pronounced in the negative form. It's mustn't, mustn't, not mustn't. You mustn't wear those shoes in the house. You mustn't wear those shoes. Now, of course, there are a few irregular negatives which you already know. Will not is won't, cannot is can't, shall not is shan't, and may doesn't even contract with not. You just need to say may not. Okay, so now are you ready for level 10 pronunciation training? These contractions get a little bit more difficult when we start using negative modal verbs to refer to the past with have. Then we have a structure that looks like this. The subject with the modal verb, with not, have, and then the past participle verb. And yes, all three words can be contracted together in spoken English. Okay, get ready for this. Could not have. Couldn't have. Couldn't have. Couldn't have. Couldn't have. Although you'll never see it written like this in English, but you will hear it spoken like this all the time by native English speakers. I couldn't have done that. I couldn't have. I couldn't have done that. So should not have becomes shouldn't have. Shouldn't have. Shouldn't have. Shouldn't have. The kids shouldn't have been in the room. The kids shouldn't have. The kids shouldn't have been in the room. Would not have. Wouldn't have. Wouldn't have. Wouldn't have. He wouldn't have approved this plan. He wouldn't have. He wouldn't have approved this plan. Might not have. Mightn't have. Mightn't have. Mightn't have. She mightn't have heard you say that. She mightn't have. She mightn't have heard you say that. Must not have. Mustn't have. Mustn't have. They mustn't have brought their son. They mustn't have. They mustn't have brought their son. They mustn't have brought their son. That one's tricky. So that's it for this pronunciation lesson. It was a lot to take in, wasn't it? A lot of tongue twisting. But you really should go back and watch this lesson a few times and practice out loud with me. Practice with me. You can't improve your pronunciation just by listening, can you? You need to imitate me. You need to copy me as I say all of the different contractions through this lesson and all of the example sentences. In fact, imitating a native English speaker is a really great way to practice and improve your pronunciation. It's going to help you to sound more natural as you speak English, because you can listen to the sounds that you should be making and imitate them straight after. Now, if you want to keep practicing like this by imitating me, then try one of my imitation lessons right here. Or here. That one's good as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week for another lesson here on mmmEnglish. Bye for now.